So today I'm going to talk to you about my research, which is part of my PhD, and it is the second paper in the PhD, which is where I'm focusing on circular economy transition within the business sector. So I'm focusing on business models and the transition. And I use system dynamics methods for that. So today's agenda is such that, we start with the introduction. We look at the problem. It's more structured like a paper or a research paper. I present to you the research questions. We go into the methodology because I don't know how many of you are familiar with system dynamics, so I'm going to introduce it to you a little bit, an overview, and then we go into the research and conclusions and further discussions. So I'm not going to delve long into this, but the problem is that human activities are causing so much pressures on Earth systems. And we are the 9 planetary boundaries that have been measured. We are already exceeding 6 of them. So we are really in a situation where we are depleting the Earth of its environmental system. And depleting the Earth is not good for us as humans. It's not good for human health. It's not good for biodiversity. It's not good for equilibrium, for nutrition, for soil degradation causes nutrition loss, water use. So there is a danger of a nature collapse, which is really the foundation of our being. And what are the solutions to this? Okay, I mean, many they focus on circular economy. So a production system where we produce products that are longer within the economy and they use less resources. This is kind of, major economies like the European Union focus on this. In Finland is a huge part of this, of course. And Paris and China Japan and China are also have also made big investments in circular economy. And there are 3 business strategies that are the most prominent in circular economy. The first one is slowing resource loops. This is just using the resources for a longer time. And within the building industry, of course, this is very prominent because, I mean, if there is something happening with your house or with buildings, we always repair and we maintain buildings. So this is actually being done on a large scale in the building industry. However, the building industry is the biggest user of raw materials in the world. So this is why we are focusing on the building industry. And just not maybe 1 or 2 years ago, we have more mass in the built environment on Earth than in the biomass, in the living environment. So today, the built environment that people have constructed is bigger or has more mass than actually the living environment. So it's a hugely impactful industry. This is why we're focusing on that industry. But there is also another strategy, which is called narrowing resource use. And this is using the resources more efficiently. And this is not only done as we are in a business school. This is not only done in a circular economy. Most businesses try to maximize their resource use anyway. But what is particularly special for the circular economy is the closing resource loop strategy. And this is a strategy where there is no waste produced. This is like the ultimate goal, at least for us as academics, that if we would go into a circular strategy where there is no waste or the waste is being used by somebody else, then we have a dynamic system that's not growing. So we are just using the resources that are there, but they go back to its place, just like a living system. this is kind of the aim for the circular economy, but we are far away from this. Currently, most societies are at the place of eight. Iceland is like at the 8% of closing the resource loop, but like the Netherlands is the highest, around maybe 18%. So at least 80% of the economy is circular. No, it's not circular. It's linear. So what needs to be done is that business models need to transition from linear business models, which is produce and use and throw away, to circular business models. It's not easy, and it's very complicated. It's such a huge, because it's a whole socioeconomic system. But and many studies have been focusing on this transition, and also in the building industry, there are a lot of barriers and drivers that have been identified on different type of levels. But there is a huge lack in studies that is looking at the connections and the dynamics between these things, and the interaction between drivers and barriers and players in the industry. And in this study, this is what we are focusing on. We are focusing on examining how internal dynamics and structure within the building industry in Iceland shapes the behavior and influences the implementation of circular economy strategies. So this is really the aim of the study. So we answer we ask our research question to guide us to this are, what variables are at play when implementing circular strategies in the Icelandic building industry? And in this presentation, we focus on regulatory mechanisms, because it's too much to speak about the whole area. And then we ask, how are these variables causally related to each other? And thirdly, what are the implications for implementing circular strategies in the building industry in Iceland? So these are the questions that guide us through the research. The methods that I'm using are semi-structured interviews, so with the different stakeholders from the building industry in Iceland. I spoke with 14 participants, and then I use system dynamics methods and group model building of building causal loop diagrams and create the dynamic hypothesis. So I'm gonna go a little bit into this background, because I guess some of you are not so familiar with the business system dynamics approach. It is an approach to study and analyzing and modeling complex systems over time. And here I'm not just talking about like a system, like a health system. A family could be a system. A business model can be a system, because everything we can define the system. And there are so many similarities within systems when we study them that we can see. And because what is happening within all systems, there are feedback loops, and there are time delays, and there are non-linearities within systems. Non-linearities, it's something that happens which is not linear. It doesn't. But if we study the systems, then we can see a lot of behaviors that the structure of the system is causing this behavior. So this is what we are doing in system dynamics, and this is what attracted me to system dynamics as such an exciting methodology to follow, because I feel it's so profound. So in system dynamics, we use two approaches. We have a qualitative approach, which is causal loop diagrams, and which we are using in this research. And then there is also a quantitative approach, where you create simulation models based on the causal loop diagrams, and you use stock and flow diagrams to simulate this. And then you can quantify what you're doing and your research, and you can simulate. But in this research, we are using causal loop diagrams. And what are those? Well, no, sorry, I'm gonna first the origin and of the system dynamics. It's since the 1950s at MIT Sloan School of Management in Boston, and this is the reason why I'm here in Boston. It is the origin of system dynamics. It was initially applied to industrial processes and corporate management to identify behaviors that happen, like for example in supply chains. There are delays in supply chains that cause so much structural influence. And system dynamics has been very influential, even though it's not so widespread. I don't know, there is a research from 1972, which is called Limits to Growth, which is really profound, which showed kind of the evolution. It was a model, system dynamics model, that showed that what will happen in the future about resource use, about and this opened eyes for many people and was very, very influential research. And there is also research from 1997, which is called the Fifth Discipline, which Harvard Business Review has nominated one of the seminal management books of the previous 75 years. So it's been really influential. And the models from system dynamics are being used by governments all around the world, and in like UNROADS and World for All models, they are really much used by in the world, but it's not so widespread because it's very complicated to enter the field. You have to learn a lot before you kind of are able to do a simulation model. The core concepts are, though, it's stocks and flow diagrams, and you look at each behavior, and every behavior is simple. You look at the causal. So what is causing this behavior? So you look at like causal interaction. So if you look at one interaction at a time, it's not that complicated. So you focus on one action at a time. And if you look at the causal, what is causing this causal relationship, what happens is that you identify reinforcing or balancing loops and within a system. So a balancing loop, for example, it's like when we are, with our body, for example, we have a temperature of 37 degrees. As soon as the temperature goes up, something in our body balances it, and the temperature goes down again. If I go out for a run today, I will start sweating, and this is cooling my body again. So there is a balancing loop, and this is like a system within my body that is balancing the behavior, the temperature. This can also be explained with a bathtub. You pour water into the bathtub, and it accumulates, and this is the water is the stock, and then you can release the water from the bathtub, so the rate, how much water goes in and how much water goes up. This is kind of how we model. But there is also a reinforcing loop that can happen, and this is, for example, in a bathtub. If you never leave out the water, if you cannot release the water from the bathtub, but there's always water coming into the bathtub, then there is just accumulation. And this is a reinforcing relationship, and the stock just piles up. The most in nature, this is like a viral infection. It's just a reinforcing loop. So the more virus infection, the more infected people, and this is increased exponential growth. But reinforcing loops can also be in the other direction. It can always be less and less and less. So it can, and this is what's happening in resource depletion of the earth. And then there are delays, and delays are very complicated, and it's very good to analyze them, because if you don't have the reaction immediately after the action, it's complicated, and you sometimes forget to accommodate for this. So this is what system dynamics allows you to do, is to analyze also the delays that happen. And the main applications for system dynamics is business and management and sustainability, public policy, and global challenges. This is where we are the main application for system dynamics. And the benefits of analyzing with a causal loop diagram, like for example, the Icelandic building industry, is that we can uncover hidden feedback mechanisms. So we have some of these loops inside the systems that are causing some behaviors, and we want to identify those. And this fosters system thinking, so to look at the whole picture and identify leverage points. Of course, this is also very important. Leverage points are points within the system where you can do small tweaking and it results in huge results. So you just do a tiny little thing, and then the results change very much. And this also helps us to think about scenario exploration. So what types of scenarios are possible, and then to reveal unintended consequences, and it enhances our cross-functional communication, because you look at the system, what is causing it, and mapping. And we could also end up doing a quantitative modeling exercise to test the efficacy of policies or efficacies of strategies. So you can choose and you get a numerical evaluation for that, which is also very, very helpful. So in our group model building exercise, so what we do is we meet up. I have experts from the industry, and we focus on one problem. And in my study, there were 4 dynamic hypotheses that were formulated. So 4 types of behaviors that were mapped. This was, and we call them lack of snowballing effect, lack of regulatory policies, lack of public demand, and a conservative culture. Today, because I cannot, because it's all very complicated and long, I'm going to focus on the lack of regulatory policies for improving environmental performance. And we're going to go through this together. I need to then go to a different program. So people they focused on the pressure to change government policies. And what does that entail? So we look at the causal effect and what this causes. So we first start at what happens when there is pressure to change government policies for circularity. So regulations and incentive circular strategy are encouraged, and this happens. So the more regulations, the more pressure, the more regulations. And this, for example, infrastructure for circular economy is implemented, and the more regulations, the more infrastructure. But the blue line, the red is reinforcing and positive, but the blue line is balancing. So the more infrastructure for circular, the less pressure to change government policies. And now we have a balancing loop. So this is a mechanism. So if there is a pressure to change government policies, more policies are implemented, more infrastructure is implemented, and this balances the pressure. So it's like a regulatory mechanism. And if we say also there are other types of policies and structures that can be implemented that also regulate the pressure to change government policies. And overall, if we implement stricter environmental regulations, this balances the pressure to change government policies. So this is one behavior within the system. So it's a balancing, regulatory stricter environmental regulations is balancing the pressure to change government policies. But what is the cause of changing government policies? Not all of the causes, but one of the causes is cost of pollution. There is an increasing cost of pollution within the building industry because the landfill costs are getting higher and higher, and there is more costs related to it. And what is causing the cost of pollution? It's the environmental performance of the building industry. But now we have a balancing mechanism. The better environmental performance of the building industry, the less cost of pollution. So it's a negative relationship. But what is causing environmental performance? So that is raw material use, waste, and greenhouse gas emissions. But here we again have a negative relationship. So more greenhouse gas emission, less environmental performance. So the relationship is negative, and it's causally related. And if we connect this with the business sector, what happens if we have a circular strategy from a company, a business model? So a circular strategy also has a negative relationship with raw material use. So the more circular strategy you employ, the less raw material use, the less greenhouse gas emission, the less waste. So there is a negative relationship. And who decides the circular strategy or not? This is the owner of the company and the motivation to implement circular strategy. But now we have a positive relationship. The more motivation to implement circular strategy, the more circular strategy is implemented. So this is how we go about. We look at each case at a time, and we do it in a place where people know about this. So we get these connections. And what is causing the motivation of the project owner to implement the circular strategy? This is the perceived risk of implementing the strategy. And this has a negative relationship again. So the more risk of implementing the strategy, the less motivation of the owner to implement it. And now we have, and the risk is positively related to the pressure to change government policies. So now we have a reinforcing loop within the building industry that affects the project owner motivation to implement the circular strategy. And this is based on the perceived risk of implementing the strategy. So here we have kind of maybe a leverage point, and we see for our analysis. But there is also other things that happen with the perceived risk of implementing strategy. It also has a positive relationship with the costs of implementing the strategy and the profits. So the more profits, the more motivation to implement strategy, but less costs, more motivation. So here we have now a mechanism, a reinforcing mechanism that's based on risk, that's kind of increasing it's lowering the motivation of, currently it is lowering the motivation of the business owner to employ circular strategy. And this is like a systematic reason for this, and it's running itself in the wrong direction. So it's kind of minimizing the circular economy strategy being used. But there are people within the system that have environmental high environmental goals. These are projects that, I mean, because I did the interviews, there are some companies who still have very high environmental goals, but even though the risk is perceived high, the cost is perceived high, but they still do it. And these people are using Swan Eco-label, and this increases building quality and decreases the perceived risk of implementing the circular strategy. It also increases well-being of building user and constructors, and this also balances the perceived risk of implementing a strategy. So this is actually working in the direction of increasing the use of circular strategy, but it's just a tiny little action here on the top. The other is what is really driving the system. And so if we look at this and look at the implications for this, I'm going back to my presentation. So what we conclude that stricter environmental regulations can serve as a catalyst for motivating owners to adopt circular strategies by mitigating the perceived operational risk and reduce the cost difference between linear and circular. There is, I mean, in economy and neoliberalism, I mean, there is something called external costs, and these external costs are shared with the society. The external costs are not taken by the producer itself. So what we are suggesting is policymakers change their policies and intervene. So implement stricter environmental regulations. And this, I mean, in the interviews, the people within the companies are really pro more regulations. And it was really nice when interview F noticed, he was like, and sometimes it just needs to be enforced, you know. For those who aren't ready, it's just like anything else. You have to do it. For example, now you get a bin at home and you're expected to sort your waste. You don't have a choice. That's just how it is. And this was more the people that I interviewed. They were really on this line of thinking. But of course, there is the business environment is there is, yeah. Well, let's talk about it. So implement stricter environmental regulations in one thing. Implement the polluter pays principle. Like here I'm talking about the externalities. Who should be the one paying for the externalities? And interview C noted, in principle, the polluter should pay for its own pollution. It's logical, isn't it? And this is logical for each person, but this is not what's happening within the industries. I mean, the externalities are being paid. It's like a shared cost. And interview K, he said, we feel like we are responsible and we want to do the right thing. And she was talking about when there is a trade-off, when businesses, if it's more simple, if it's cheaper, businesses tend to use this method instead of the more complicated and the more expensive method. This is just how businesses are run, and so this is that's why what we said, we need to just make them do it. And if everyone has to do it, if it's a regulation, it's a level playing field. Everybody has to do it, so it's not unfair if you are breaking the rules. So this is what the people in the interviews were saying a lot. Stop supporting linear. I mean, it's logical, as interview E stated. He said policy should be adapted to reduce emissions and environmental impact. But this is not the case today. Policies are adapted for linear processes. Education is adopted to linear processes. Funding is supported for linear processes. And when I spoke with the bank, for example, they said how helpful green funding is. And these frameworks guide our work, ensuring we meet defined actions and qualify for green financing. And they also provide authority to steer projects sustainably, helping with decision making. But in my there was only the financial institutions that I interviewed, and also the municipalities that focused on green financing. I mean, the green financing is not so much in the business side of the industry yet in Iceland. Implement training and education programs. It's so important that people know how to use circular economy methods. And when there are so many smaller businesses, at least in Iceland, and like one of the smaller business owners that I spoke with, I mean, he said, our business model is survival. We do what is convenient, we do what is easy, we do the things people know. We are not educating a whole system here. So we need to re-educate our industry in a way and with a plan. And mandatory environmental targets. Because if there is so often a trade-off between environmental performance and costs. And usually, even when there are targets and they are voluntary, the owners usually prefer the cost cut instead of the environmental performance. So this is very important. And it's also very important because buyers, who are the users of the buildings, they are not aware of the material that is used for the construction. I mean, there is not as the financier said, she said the demand for circular housing is zero. And this does not motivate project owners to change their strategies. Because when people are buying their house, they use other criteria, which are mainly how does the house look and where is it? And what is the size and the price of it? So they don't really care at this stage. I mean, there is not a demand from the users. Because it's hidden. You don't know what's inside the walls of your house. But what happens if you use materials which are ecological and more friendly, like the eco-label Swan? You actually improve the quality of the buildings. You improve the indoor quality. You enhance acoustic insulation. And the people, this was for me was so exciting to see when I was interviewing the carpenters. And they had been using Swan labeled materials, and they said we are never going back to non-Swan labeled materials, even though it's more expensive. Because for us, we are treating this material every day, and we feel it's so much less toxic. There is less smell. And we don't need to go all the time to. It's very expensive also to get rid of like hazardous materials. And it's only one place in Reykjavik. Sometimes you might have to drive like 20 or 50 kilometers for that. So you don't need that when you don't have hazardous materials. But it's also just so much kinder for your hands and for your breathing. So this was a little bit surprising for me when it's really the people down who are doing the construction, they love Swan labeled products. But of course, they are not paying for those. They are also 20% more expensive, because so these were the conclusions from the. And so for future research, I suggest that we study other industries using CLDs to see if the behavior of the industry is really preventing us from implementing circular strategies. So this is kind of because that's the reason for this. And we could also develop system dynamics models to test the efficacy of different approaches and how much it costs and how much the benefits are. We can do it both for the business models from a business perspective. We could also do it from a policy perspective. Test the efficacy of policies for governments. And then there is also a very interesting question about why some businesses have very strong environmental targets while others don't when you have a voluntary system. I mean, and they still stick to those targets. So you have people who are really doing the right thing, and even though they don't gain so much money from that, which is also very interesting. So thank you. This is what I wanted to present, and now we can have some discussions and comments. I give you here, this is like how we do the group model building, is using these Post-it notes and on a board in front of all of us, and we look at the causal connections, and then we see, is this reinforcing or is this so this is a picture from our workshop. So, but it's very easy if you do one at a time, and then you have a whole picture which is complicated, but one at a time is easy. Thank you.